Prepare yourselves for a story that will leave you breathless. If you love drama, intrigue, and life's unexpected twists, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss how the fate of our characters unfolds. What happens when the woman you discarded, whom you called simple, unambitious, and a burden holding you back, lands in a life you could only dream of. Alexander Thorne believed he had it all: a luxurious office, a 7-figure salary, and a dazzling new trophy wife. He cast aside his college sweetheart, Clara Bennett, believing he had upgraded in every possible way. He would see her one last time at a corporate event he considered the pinnacle of his success, only to discover that the quiet, unassuming man accompanying her was not just her new partner. He was the sole owner of the entire company to which Alexander had dedicated his life, and revenge was about to be served. Not hot and loud, but cold, silent, and utterly devastating. This is the story of how a man who thought he had reached the summit was pushed from the peak by the ghost of a life he so carelessly abandoned. Hit that like button now if you're ready for an unforgettable journey. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another empowering story. And tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Chapter 1. The Breaking Point. The air in the minimalist million-dollar apartment felt thin and sterile, much like the conversation. Alexander Thorne adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Tom Ford shirt, the impeccable fabric in stark contrast to the fraying edges of his 14-year marriage to Clara. "It's just not working, Clara," he said, his voice tinged with a practiced, almost bored finality. He avoided her eyes, looking instead out the floor-to-ceiling window at the glittering expanse of London that stretched below. This view, this apartment, this life, he had earned it. And Clara, in her worn jeans and a simple gray t-shirt, no longer fit the picture. Clara clutched a lukewarm teacup, her knuckles white. Her heart was a cold, heavy stone in her chest. 14 years, Alexander. That's not something you just decide isn't working, like a faulty appliance. "Don't be dramatic," he scoffed, finally turning to face her. His gaze swept over her, and she could feel him cataloging her perceived flaws: the absence of makeup, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, the lack of designer labels. "We want different things. I have goals, ambitions. I'm about to be named Senior Managing Director at Apex Capital. I need a partner who complements that, someone who thrives in that world." The unspoken words hung in the air between them. Someone who isn't you. Clara had been a rising star in the art history world, a curator with a keen eye and a passion that lit up every room she entered. But as Alexander's career in finance began its meteoric ascent, the demands grew. The constant travel, the late-night business dinners, the expectation that she would be the perfect smiling hostess at a moment's notice. She had voluntarily stepped back, postponing her own ambitions to support his. She managed his life, their home, their social calendar, creating the stable foundation upon which he built his empire. She thought it was a partnership. He, it was now clear, saw it as a service contract that had expired. "So, all this time," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "the dinners I hosted for your clients, the weekends I spent alone while you were on business trips, the career I gave up, that was me holding you back?" "It was a different phase," he said dismissively, waving a hand as if swatting an annoying fly. "We were kids when we met. We've grown apart. My life is moving in a certain direction, and yours, well, it's static. You're comfortable, you lack drive. Clara, you're happy with your books and your quiet little life. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not enough for me." That was the deepest cut. He had taken her contentment, the peace she had cultivated in the small spaces he allowed her, and turned it into a character flaw. The divorce was a brutal, efficient affair. Alexander's lawyers, sharp and ruthless, dismembered their shared life with surgical precision. He was generous, he told everyone. He allowed her to keep the modest savings account they had started in their 20s and half the equity from the sale of their first home. A pittance compared to the fortune he had amassed in his own name. The apartment, the art collection she had curated, the stock portfolio. It was all his, the fruit of his labor. On the final day, as Clara packed her last personal belongings into cardboard boxes, Alexander entered with Scarlett, a woman who seemed to have been assembled in a lab for the specific purpose of being a billionaire's girlfriend. She was all long blonde hair, impossibly white teeth, and a dress that cost more than Clara's first car. She glided through the space, her eyes scanning the art on the walls with a vacant, possessive air. "Alexander, darling," Scarlett purred, ignoring Clara completely. "Are you sure you want to let this one go? The colors are a bit muted." She pointed to a painting by a lesser-known impressionist that Clara had discovered and treasured, a piece that represented the last vestiges of her old life. Alexander chuckled, a sound that made Clara's stomach clench. "Whatever you want, babe. We can redecorate everything. A completely fresh start." Clara stood motionless, a box of books in her arms. She looked at Alexander, this man she had loved since she was 19, and saw a complete stranger. The warmth in his eyes, the easy laugh she used to adore, had been replaced by a cold, metallic gleam. He looked right through her, his face a mask of indifference. She didn't say a word. She simply turned, walked out of the apartment, and didn't look back. As the elevator descended, she saw herself reflected in the polished brass doors. She looked tired, defeated. The woman Alexander described, static, unambitious, comfortable, stared back at her. For one terrifying moment, she believed him. Her new apartment was small, a second-floor walk-up in a neighborhood with more character than glamour, in the heart of Edinburgh. The first few months were a blur of quiet grief. The silence was the loudest thing. There were no last-minute client dinners to prepare, no suits to pick up from the dry cleaner, no ego to manage. There was just her. She unpacked the boxes of her old life, and with them, the woman she used to be. She pulled out her art history textbooks, her research papers, the exhibition catalogs she had helped curate years ago. It felt like an archaeological dig, unearthing the fossilized remains of a forgotten dream. One rainy Tuesday, looking at the blank walls of her apartment, a spark ignited. It wasn't the roaring fire of Alexander's ambition, but a small, steady flame. She deserved more than this quiet sadness. She deserved to be surrounded by beauty, the kind she understood, the kind she had once been an expert in. She took Alexander's generous settlement, rather than clinging to it for security. She made a decision. She wasn't going to be static. She was going to invest in herself. She started a small, one-woman art advisory business from her dining room table. She called it Bennett Curations. Her first clients were old contacts from her university days, friends who had stayed in the art world and remembered her talent. Work was slow at first, sourcing individual pieces for modest homes, helping young collectors make their first purchases. It wasn't the high-stakes world of multi-million-dollar auctions she once dreamed of, but it was hers. Every success, no matter how small, was a brick laid in the foundation of her new life. She didn't follow Alexander's life, but it was impossible to avoid it completely. He was a regular feature in the city's society pages, always photographed with Scarlett clinging to his arm. Finance magnate Alexander Thorne and socialite Scarlett Davies dazzle at opera gala. Power couple shines at charity ball. They were the picture of success, and with every glossy photo, the world seemed to affirm his decision. He had upgraded. He had won. Clara, meanwhile, was a footnote in a story he no longer told. But as she hung the last piece of art in a client's home, a vibrant abstract that brought the whole room to life, she felt a satisfaction no society photo could capture. She was building something real, something of her own. And she was just getting started. Do you think Clara regretted giving up her career for Alexander? Let us know your opinion in the comments below. Chapter 2. The Quiet Ascent. Julian Croft moved through the world like a phantom. He was one of the few people on the planet whose wealth was so vast, so deeply embedded in the bedrock of the global economy, that it afforded him the one luxury no one else could buy: true anonymity. He owned shipping lines, tech incubators, vast tracts of commercial real estate, and a portfolio of private equity firms, one of which was a mid-performing company he barely thought about, called Apex Capital Partners. His name wasn't on any building. He didn't give interviews. His holding company, Croft International, was a name whispered in the highest echelons of finance, but completely unknown to the public. His passion, the place where he spent both his money and his time, was art. He didn't collect for investment or status. He collected because it was the only thing that made the noise of his life quiet. In the silent conversation between a viewer and a canvas, he found a clarity that multi-billion-dollar balance sheets could never provide. He learned about Clara Bennett through a trusted source, the director of a major museum, to whom Julian was a significant, albeit anonymous, donor. "There's a woman," the director had said over lunch. "Clara Bennett. She was brilliant, one of my best students years ago. Disappeared into a marriage for a while, but she's back on her own doing advisory work. She has the eye. She doesn't just see a painting, she sees the soul behind it. She finds stories, not just assets." The word stories piqued Julian's interest. He was tired of dealers who only talked about auction records and appreciation potential. He asked the director to make a discreet introduction. The first time Clara met Julian was at a small, independent coffee shop, halfway between her apartment and his discreet downtown office. She had been nervous, expecting a pompous elderly magnate. The man who stood to greet her was anything but. He was in his mid-40s, with kind, intelligent eyes that held a hint of weariness. He wore a simple, well-made cashmere sweater and dark jeans. There was an aura of stillness about him, a stark contrast to Alexander's frantic, restless energy. "Miss Bennett," his voice was quiet and warm. "Julian Croft. Thank you for meeting me. Please call me Clara." Their conversation wasn't about money. He didn't ask her about her fees. Instead, he asked what she was passionate about. He wanted to know what period of art made her feel the most, what artists she believed were criminally overlooked. She found herself talking for an hour, words spilling out, with an enthusiasm she hadn't felt in years. She spoke of the Dutch masters, the quiet dignity of a Vermeer, the raw, chaotic emotion of a Turner seascape. He listened, truly listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't check his phone. He didn't steer the conversation back to himself. When she finally paused, slightly embarrassed by her own fervor, he simply smiled. "I'm looking for a piece," he said. "Something for my personal study. It's a quiet room. I want the art to reflect that. Not silence, but a quiet contemplation. Can you help me find that?" It was the most beautiful, articulate commission she had ever received. Their relationship unfolded over a series of gallery visits, studio tours with emerging artists, and long conversations over coffee. He was a puzzle she slowly enjoyed solving. He was clearly a man of immense resources, but there was no ostentation. He drove a modest electric sedan by billionaire standards. His watch was elegant but not flashy. He spoke of business trips to Singapore and Zurich as casually as Alexander talked about a weekend on the coast, but he never mentioned his company or his position. Clara found herself opening up to him in ways she never had with Alexander. She told him about her abandoned academic career, the slow erosion of her confidence during her marriage, and the quiet joy she was finding in rebuilding her life on her own terms. "He told me I lacked drive," she confessed one afternoon, standing in front of a Rothko that seemed to vibrate with color. "He saw my contentment as a weakness." Julian remained silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the canvas. "Contentment is not the opposite of drive," he said finally, his voice soft. "It is the fuel. A man who needs constant chaos to feel alive is a man running from himself. A person who can find peace in a quiet room, that is a person who has already won." His words wrapped around her like a warm blanket. For the first time, she saw her own nature not as a disadvantage, but as a strength. One evening, he invited her to dinner at his home. It wasn't a sprawling mansion, but a breathtaking penthouse that occupied the entire top floor of a historic pre-war building. The space was a masterpiece of understated luxury: warm woods, soft lighting, and walls adorned with the most incredible private art collection she had ever seen. There was a small Monet, a sketch by de Kooning, a stunning Richter. "This is extraordinary, Julian," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "It's just my home," he said with a small shrug. "It's where I come to be quiet." He had cooked for her himself, a simple but delicious pasta dish. They ate on a small terrace overlooking the park, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. It was at that moment, with the taste of good wine on her lips and the comfortable silence stretching between them, that Clara realized she was falling in love. It was a different kind of love than she had known. It wasn't the frantic, all-consuming passion of her youth with Alexander. This was a slow, deep current, a feeling of coming home to a place she didn't even know she was looking for. As their relationship deepened, she began to manage his entire collection, advising on acquisitions, overseeing restorations, and cataloging his works. He trusted her implicitly. He gave her a budget that made her head spin, but his instructions were always the same. "Buy what is important, Clara. Buy the stories that need to be told." She never asked him about the specifics of his business. She knew he was the head of Croft International, a private investment firm. To her, it was just a name, the source of the funds that allowed them this beautiful life. She had no idea of its scale, no concept of the vast corporate machinery that silently whirred beneath the surface of their idyllic world. She didn't care. She was in love with Julian Croft, the man who listened, the man who understood the value of quiet, the man who saw her not as an accessory, but as a partner. One evening, they were curled up on the sofa. A documentary about the artist Jean-Michel Basquiat played softly on the screen. Julian was reviewing some documents on a tablet, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Everything all right?" she asked, tracing a pattern on his sleeve. "Just a routine Q3 review for one of our acquisitions," he murmured, his eyes still on the screen. "A private equity firm we bought a few years back. They're a bit aggressive for my taste, but they put up good numbers." He swiped a finger across the screen, bringing up an organizational chart. "Their board is pushing for a big new M&A deal. Their top executive is eager. A real shark, apparently." "What's the firm called?" she asked idly, her attention mostly on the documentary. "Apex Capital Partners," he said. Without looking up, the name hit her like a physical blow. The air left her lungs. Apex Capital, Alexander's company. The company for which she had sacrificed her marriage. The company where he was a shark, desperate to make his mark. She looked at Julian's profile, this kind, quiet man, who was now her whole world. He spoke of Alexander's firm as a minor asset, a line item on a balance sheet. He swiped the screen again, and a chain of emails appeared. She saw the name Alexander Thorne in the toe field of a memo. The pieces clicked with horrifying, dizzying clarity. Julian wasn't just rich. He wasn't just successful. He was Alexander's boss. Not just his boss, but the ultimate authority. The invisible hand. The god in the machine. She felt a wave of nausea, followed by a strange, chilling calm. The universe, it seemed, had a perverse sense of humor. All this time, Alexander had been climbing a ladder, clawing his way to the top, desperate for the approval of a man he had never met. And that man was now falling asleep on the sofa, his head in the lap of the woman Alexander had thrown away like trash. She looked at Julian, his face softened by the dim light, and then thought of Alexander, arrogant and proud, strutting through the halls of Apex, completely oblivious. The drama he had written for their lives, where he was the conquering hero, and she, the forgotten prologue, was about to take a turn he could never have imagined. And the curtain was about to rise. Do you think Clara should have told Julian sooner? Share your thoughts in the comments. Chapter 3. The Grand Entrance. Alexander Thorne felt invincible. He was on the verge of the deal that would cement his legacy at Apex Capital. For 6 months, he had been spearheading the hostile takeover of a small but brilliantly innovative biotech firm called Biogenics. It was a ruthless, aggressive campaign that had pushed legal and ethical boundaries. But Alexander thrived on that adrenaline. This was the deal that would finally give him the senior managing director title, the 8-figure bonus, and the fawning respect he craved. His life with Scarlett was exactly as he had designed it, a whirlwind of black-tie galas, exclusive resort vacations, and extravagant spending. Scarlett was the perfect accessory, beautiful and vacuous. Their conversation never strayed to anything more complex than her next spa appointment or the latest gossip from her social circle. She was a reflection of his success, and he loved her for it. Yet sometimes, in the dark of night, a sliver of unease would creep in. He would look at Scarlett's perfectly placid face, asleep beside him, and feel a deep emptiness. He remembered a time when conversation meant debating art or philosophy with Clara until 2 in the morning, her eyes alight with passion. He banished the thought as quickly as it came, dismissing it as a momentary weakness. He had made his choice. This was the better life. One evening, he and Scarlett were dining at the Mirror, a 3-Michelin-star restaurant where reservations were a status symbol. He was celebrating a preliminary victory on the Biogenics deal. "To us," he said, raising his glass of aged Bordeaux, "and to my new kingdom." Scarlett giggled, clinking her glass against his. "I saw the most divine diamond bracelet at Cartier, darling. It would look perfect with my dress for the Apex Gala." Alexander barely heard her. His eyes had drifted across the opulent dining room and frozen. There, at a secluded table, was Clara. But it wasn't the Clara he remembered. The tired, defeated woman from the apartment was gone. This Clara was radiant. She wore a simple yet exquisitely cut emerald green dress that highlighted the warmth of her skin. Her hair was styled in soft waves, and she was laughing, a genuine, uninhibited sound that seemed to fill the space around her. And the man she was with. Alexander's eyes narrowed. He didn't recognize him. The man was not ostentatious. He wore a discreet, expensive suit, his attention focused solely on Clara. There was an intimacy between them, a comfort that spoke of something deep and real. Alexander felt a hot, unfamiliar pang of jealousy. It was absurd. He had Scarlett. He had everything. So why did the sight of his static ex-wife, looking so vibrantly happy, feel like a personal insult? "Who is that?" Scarlett asked, following his gaze. "Is that your ex? God, what is she wearing?" "It's no one," Alexander snapped, turning his attention back to his plate. But his appetite had vanished. He watched them out of the corner of his eye for the rest of the meal. He saw the man place a hand over Clara's, his touch soft and possessive. He saw the way Clara looked at him, with an adoration she had once reserved only for Alexander. He told himself it didn't matter. She was probably dating some boring professor or a mid-level accountant. Good for her. The incident, however, got under his skin. He found himself idly searching for her online, something he hadn't done since the divorce. He found the Bennett Curations website. It was professional, elegant. The portfolio section showcased impressive projects, rooms transformed by her impeccable taste. A small biography mentioned her work with private collectors. He scoffed. It was a glorified shopping service. Still, it was more than he expected. Meanwhile, Clara lived in a state of surreal awareness. Knowing Julian's secret, while he remained oblivious to its significance for her, was a constant, low-level hum beneath the surface of her life. She wrestled with when, or if, she should tell him. It felt like a betrayal of their peaceful world to introduce the ugliness of her past with Alexander into it. And a part of her, a dark, hidden part, felt a morbid curiosity to see how it would all unfold. The annual Apex Capital Partners Gala was the event of the season in the financial world. It was a night of pure unadulterated self-congratulation, and for Alexander, it was his coronation. The Biogenics deal was almost finalized. The board had approved it, and all that remained was the final sign-off from the notoriously reclusive owner of the parent company, Croft International. It was a formality, they assured him. The owner trusted Apex's leadership. "This is it, Scarlett," he said, adjusting his bow tie in the mirror of his penthouse. "Tonight, everyone will see who runs this city." Clara had initially declined Julian's invitation to the gala. "A corporate party, Julian. That's not our thing. It sounds dreadful." Julian had smiled. "I know, and I promise we'll only stay an hour. But this one is unavoidable. The board has been begging me to make an appearance for years. They think it'll be good for morale and," he added, his eyes twinkling, "they're giving out a Deal Maker of the Year award, and I'm expected to present it. I need my beautiful partner there to support me." He had given in, a knot of dread and anticipation forming in her stomach. Apex Capital, Deal Maker of the Year. It had to be Alexander. The universe was not just humorous. It was a cruel and brilliant playwright. She chose her dress carefully. It was a stunning midnight blue silk gown, elegant and powerful all at once. It was armor. As she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. This wasn't Alexander's mousy ex-wife, nor the quiet art advisor. This was a woman who knew her own worth. A woman who stood beside one of the most powerful men in the world. Not as an accessory, but as an equal. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the city's most luxurious hotel. The room was a sea of black tuxedos and glittering gowns, buzzing with the energy of 1,000 egos. Alexander and Scarlett were at the entrance, Alexander basking in the congratulations of his colleagues. "A masterpiece, Thorne!" roared his direct boss, Robert Miller, clapping him on the back. The biogenics acquisition will be studied for years. The man from Croft International will be very pleased. Alexander preened. Just doing my job, Robert. It was then that a hush fell over the room. Conversations died. Heads turned towards the grand entrance. Julian Croft had arrived. He moved with the same quiet grace, but in this context, it was magnified into an aura of immense power. The crowd parted for him as if by an invisible force, and on his arm, looking serene and impossibly beautiful, was Clara. Alexander's champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The sound was lost in the collective gasp of the room. He stared, his mind refusing to process what his eyes saw. It was like watching two worlds collide, two narratives that should never have intersected. Clara, with the man from the restaurant here, and everyone was looking at him, not with admiration, but with growing, horrified awe. The man who had been a phantom, a legend, the ultimate source of power in his world, was here, and his ex-wife was on his arm. Scarlett's grip on his arm tightened. "Alexander, what's happening? Who is that man?" Alexander couldn't speak. His throat was dry. He saw Robert Miller, Apex's CEO, striding forward, his face a comical mask of reverence and shock. "Mr. Croft, we are profoundly honored by your presence." Mr. Croft, the name echoed in Alexander's skull. Croft International, the parent company, the owner. His blood ran cold. The invincible feeling evaporated, replaced by a dread so profound it paralyzed him. The man from the restaurant, the boring professor he had dismissed, the man his ex-wife looked at with such love. He wasn't just an anonymous suitor. He was the owner of everything. He owned Apex. He owned Alexander. Clara's eyes, calm and steady, met his across the room. There was no malice in them. No triumph. Only a quiet, devastating understanding. In that single glance, Alexander Thorne's entire world, the kingdom he had built on the ashes of his marriage, crumbled to dust. The ballroom felt as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of it. For Alexander, the glittering crystal chandeliers, the softly playing orchestra, the clinking of glasses, everything seemed like a surreal, distant dream. His reality had shrunk to the space between him and the couple standing at the entrance, the woman he considered worthless, and the man who held his entire professional life in the palm of his hand. Julian, seemingly oblivious to the shockwave he had created, nodded courteously to Apex's CEO. "Robert, an excellent event," he said, his voice easily carrying across the hushed room. His eyes, however, were on Clara. "I believe you know my partner, Clara Bennett." Robert Miller's head swiveled to Clara, his face a comical mask of confusion and panic. He had met Clara a couple of times over the years, always in the context of being Alexander Thorne's quiet wife. To see her here, introduced as the partner of the firm's ultimate owner, was a paradigm shift he couldn't comprehend. "Clara, yes, of course. What? How wonderful to see you," he stammered, his obsequious smile trembling. Clara's expression was one of cool, distant grace. "Robert, it's been a long time." Her gaze swept past him, landing once more on Alexander, for a split second before returning to Julian's side. The Dealmaker of the Year award ceremony was a public execution. Alexander, who had been anticipating this moment for months, had to walk from his table to the stage on legs that felt like lead. The applause was scattered, confused. The whispers were louder than the claps. He stood on stage, bathed in a spotlight that now felt like an interrogation lamp. Julian was handed the heavy crystal award. He walked to the podium, his presence commanding the absolute attention of every person in the room. "Good evening," Julian began, his voice calm and measured. Apex Capital has had a profitable year, and a key part of that has been the aggressive M&A strategy led by Mr. Alexander Thorne. He paused, letting the name hang in the air. He turned slightly to look at Alexander, who felt a bead of sweat roll down his temple. The Biogenics acquisition in particular has been noted for its tenacity, Julian continued, choosing the word with surgical precision. It was a campaign that valued victory above all else. It has, no doubt, secured a significant asset for the portfolio. Alexander felt a faint glimmer of hope. Perhaps this would be okay. Perhaps Croft was a pragmatist who only cared about the bottom line. However, Julian said, his tone shifting almost imperceptibly, at Croft International, we believe that how one wins matters as much as if one wins. True sustainable value is not built on scorched earth. It is built on integrity, on foresight, and on partnerships, not on hostile destruction. He turned his full attention back to the audience. This deal, while profitable in the short term, has damaged relationships with key innovators in the biotech sector and has exposed our firm to significant long-term litigation risks due to the methods employed. The cost of this victory, I'm afraid, will be far greater than the price we paid. It was a complete and utter repudiation. He wasn't just criticizing the deal. He was dismantling the entire philosophy Alexander had built his career on. He was calling him reckless and short-sighted in front of the entire industry. Julian then looked directly at Alexander, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He extended the crystal award. For your victory, Mr. Thorne. Alexander took the award. It felt as heavy as a tombstone. His hand trembled. He mumbled a thank you that was swallowed by the cavernous silence. He stumbled back to his table, his face burning with humiliation. Scarlett stared at him, her expression a mix of fear and disgust. His value in her eyes was dropping in real time. He watched as Julian walked away from the podium, and Clara moved gracefully to his side, placing a soft hand on his arm. They looked like a king and queen surveying their court. Alexander was nothing more than a disgraced court jester. The gala ended shortly after. People avoided Alexander's table as if it were radioactive. His colleagues, who had been patting him on the back an hour earlier, now couldn't meet his eyes. The message was clear. His patron saint had excommunicated him. The drive home was silent and cold. Scarlett sat as far away from him as possible in the back of the car. "So," she said finally, her voice dripping ice, "your ex-wife is dating the man who owns your company." It wasn't a question. "I didn't know," Alexander said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You didn't know?" She laughed, a shrill, ugly sound. "You, Alexander Thorne, the man who knows everything, who prides himself on having every angle covered. You missed that. You told me she was a nobody, a sad housewife, living in a pathetic apartment." "She was," he insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. "Clearly she wasn't," Scarlett sneered. "My God, the humiliation. Everyone was looking at me. They weren't looking because they were jealous. They were pitying me." She shuddered. To be married to the man whose ex-wife is sleeping with his boss. How am I going to show my face at the club tomorrow? Alexander had no answer. He felt empty, a husk of the man who had left the apartment that morning. The kingdom he had been so proud of was a house of cards, and the woman he had discarded had just revealed herself as the storm that would bring it all down. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that his career at Apex was over. Julian Croft hadn't needed to fire him. He had simply exposed him, and the system would do the rest. He would be sidelined, his projects reassigned, his authority eroded, until he had no choice but to resign in disgrace. He thought of Clara's calm expression. It wasn't triumphant. It was something far more devastating. It was indifference. She had stopped caring enough to even be an enemy. He was just a loose end, a piece of her past that had inconveniently resurfaced in her present. The ultimate power move wasn't revenge. It was the realization that the person who wronged you was now so small, so insignificant, that they were no longer worth the emotional energy. Alexander Thorne, the shark, had just been informed he was plankton. What do you think Alexander felt in that moment? Did he deserve it? Let us know your comments. Chapter 4. The Path to Freedom. The consequences were swifter and more brutal than Alexander Thorne could have imagined. On the Monday after the gala, he walked into the Apex offices, and the atmosphere was thick with his professional obituary. People avoided his gaze. Those who spoke to him did so with a tense, pitying courtesy that was worse than open hostility. Robert Miller, his former champion, called him into his office. The door was closed. "Alexander," Robert began, not even bothering to offer him a seat. "We're going to have to restructure the leadership on the biogenics integration. Given Mr. Croft's feedback, we need a different approach, a more diplomatic touch." "You're taking me off my own deal?" Alexander asked, the words tasting like ash. "It's not your deal anymore, Alexander. It's the firm's deal, and the firm needs to protect its relationship with its owner," Robert said, his face impassive. "Your other projects will also be reassigned. We need you to step back. Focus on internal strategy for a while." Internal strategy, the corporate equivalent of Siberia. They were putting him in the freezer, leaving him to wither in a silent, windowless office until he got the hint and resigned. His life began to unravel. Scarlett, seeing that the wellspring of money and status was about to dry up, packed her bags within a week. There was no tearful goodbye, just a cold note left on the kitchen's marble island. "I can't be associated with this kind of failure," it read. "My lawyer will be in touch." She even took the muted painting Clara had left behind. He was alone in the sterile apartment, the silence now a crushing weight. He looked at the city lights, the view that had once made him feel like a king, and felt nothing but vertigo. He was a ghost, haunting the monument to a life that was no longer his. About a month after the gala, his phone rang. It was an unlisted number. "Hello?" he answered, his voice flat. "Alexander, it's Clara." She froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Clara, what do you want?" "I'm at our old coffee shop, the one near the university. I have something of yours. I'd like to return it." Her voice was even, uninflected. It wasn't a request. He didn't know why he went. Perhaps it was a masochistic impulse, a desire to see the full extent of his own destruction. He found her at a small table in the back, a steaming mug in her hands. She looked at peace. The frantic energy that had defined his own life was completely absent from her. She gestured to the chair opposite her. He sat, feeling like a supplicant. "I didn't plan any of this, you know," she said quietly, looking into her mug. "I didn't know who Julian was in that sense until a few weeks before the gala. I never set out to hurt you. You could have warned me," he croaked. She finally looked at him, and her eyes were clear and direct. "Why? So you could try to manipulate the situation? So you could try to use my relationship with him to your advantage?" The Alexander I knew would have. The man who told me I was a burden holding him back would have seen it as an opportunity. He winced. The truth of her words was a physical blow. "I'm not here to gloat," she continued. "I'm here because I'm finally closing this chapter of my life, and I want to do so without loose ends." She pushed a small velvet box across the table. He opened it. Inside was the simple, elegant engagement ring he had given her 15 years earlier. He had told her to sell it during the divorce, that she would need the money. "Julian is not a vengeful man, Alexander. she said. "He's a builder. He doesn't enjoy tearing things down." What he said at the gala, that was a business assessment. It was his honest opinion of your work. It wasn't personal for him. It felt personal, Alexander mumbled. "I know," she said, with a hint of sympathy in her voice. "Because for you, everything is personal. Your work, your money, your status. That's what you are. You never understood that for me, it was always about us. The partnership. When you ended that, you didn't just leave me. You erased the foundation of your own life. You've been in free fall ever since. You just didn't realize it." She stood up, pulling on her coat. "Julian has established a philanthropic arm of his company, the Croft Foundation. He's asked me to head its new art and culture division. I'll be endowing museums, funding scholarships for young artists, the work I dreamed of doing when I was 20. Turns out my quiet little life and my lack of drive were just waiting for the right soil to grow." She gave him one last lingering look. It wasn't pity, but a kind of sad farewell. "Goodbye, Alexander. I hope you find something real to build on next time." She turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving him alone with the ghosts of who they used to be and the ruin of what he had become. He looked at the ring, a perfect circle that represented a promise he had shattered. For the first time in his adult life, Alexander Thorne cried. He wasn't crying for the loss of his job, or his money, or his trophy wife. He was crying for the loss of the only thing of true value he had ever possessed, the love of a good woman. He had been too arrogant and too blind to deserve. A year later, the world was a different place for both of them. Alexander Thorne's exile was complete. His formal resignation from Apex was less a decision and more an inevitability, a final, quiet step in a long fall from grace. His name, once synonymous with aggressive success, was now a toxic asset. No major firm would touch him. The story of his public downfall was a modern Icarus fable, too potent. Told at expensive lunches he was no longer invited to, he sold the penthouse to cover the mountain of debt Scarlett's lifestyle had accrued and his own extravagant spending had built. The Tom Ford suits were consigned, the sports car repossessed. Finally, he found a position 2 time zones away, in a city known for its modesty, not its ambition. He was now a senior analyst at a mid-market logistics firm, a company that moved actual boxes, not abstract millions. His world had become brutally, painfully literal. He lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in a sprawling complex called Oak Meadows. His balcony didn't overlook a glittering cityscape, but a communal swimming pool that was drained half the year. The silence of his old apartment had been an oppressive weight. The noise of this new life was a different kind of torture. The thin walls carried the sounds of his neighbors' lives, a baby crying, a couple arguing, the muffled bass of a teenager's music. He was no longer above it all. He was immersed in the mundane clutter of ordinary life he had fought so hard to escape. His anonymity was absolute. At the grocery store, he was just a man buying milk. At the office, he was just the new guy from out of town. The deference, the fear, the envy he had commanded were gone. Stripped of his title, his wealth, and his audience, he was forced to sit with the man who remained. He didn't like the company. Some nights he would sit in the dark, the velvet box with Clara's ring on the coffee table, and trace the path from that first blush of love in a university dorm room to this desolate present. The journey had been about acquisition, and now he understood that he had acquired nothing of substance. He had only lost. The work of rebuilding a self, not a portfolio, was arduous and lonely, and he was just beginning. Meanwhile, in a sunny corner office overlooking Regent's Park, Clara Bennett Croft, signed the final grant of the quarter. Her new name, which she had adopted after a quiet wedding in the Tuscan countryside, felt less like a change and more like a realization. The ceremony had been the antithesis of an apex gala. 20 guests, a simple linen dress, and vows exchanged under a 1,000-year-old olive tree as the sun set. Their honeymoon was spent visiting forgotten small chapels to see obscure frescoes, their joy shared. Something quiet and powerful. As director of the Art and Culture Division of the Croft Foundation, Clara had become one of the most important figures in her field. She didn't just write checks, she built programs. She established a grant, First Brush, for low-income artists, providing not just funds, but also mentorship and studio space. Her current passion project was the restoration and digitization of the archives of a 1930s surrealist painter who had been overshadowed by her male contemporaries. She was literally rewriting art history, giving voice to the silenced and bringing forgotten stories to light. Her quiet little life had found its grand purpose. Her partnership with Julian was a study in serene balance. They were a team. He sought her counsel not just on art, but on the human impact of his commercial ventures. Her perspective, her innate understanding of substance over style, had become his most reliable metric. Their evenings weren't spent at galas, but in quiet companionship, reading side by side, debating a new artist she had discovered, or cooking together in their beautiful warm kitchen. Their power wasn't loud. It wasn't about being seen. It was about seeing each other, fully and completely. One evening, as they walked home after a gallery opening, Julian slipped his hand into her arm. "Do you ever think about him?" he asked softly. Clara remained silent for a moment, watching the city lights blur. "Sometimes," she admitted, no longer with anger, only with sadness. "I think of him like a character from a book I read long ago, a man who was so terrified of being ordinary that he never learned to be truly extraordinary. He thought value was something you could put on a balance sheet." She looked at Julian, at this man who possessed so much of the world, yet moved through it as if he were simply a grateful guest. "He never understood," she finished, "that the most valuable things in life are the ones that have no price at all." She leaned her head on his shoulder in peace, her past a distant shore, her future an open, beautiful horizon. She rarely thought of Alexander, but when she did, it was with a distant, detached sadness. For a man who had traded a masterpiece for a cheap imitation, and only realized its value when it was hanging in another man's gallery, admired by the world he had desperately tried and failed to conquer. And there you have it, the ultimate story of karmic justice. This wasn't about a woman seeking revenge. It was about a woman rediscovering her own immense worth, while the man who discarded her learned the brutal difference between price and value. Alexander Thorne chased the glittering, hollow prizes of the world, only to discover that the true treasure was the person he left behind. Clara's victory wasn't just winning the game. It was realizing she was never meant to be a player in his. She was the owner of a completely different game, one played with integrity, passion, and grace. If you loved this story of vindication and the powerful truth that a person's worth is never defined by another's opinion, be sure to hit that like button and tell us your favorite moment in the comments below. What do you think Alexander's life is like now? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story of drama, intrigue, and life's unexpected twists. Thank you for listening.